Alright, so today we're going to be talking about K-pop demon hunters. This video is definitely a bit of a departure from the stuff that I usually make, so if you are new here, welcome. I hope you enjoy your stay. But with that being said, let's just go ahead and get right into it, yeah? Now, if for some reason you are watching this video without having actually seen the movie, first of all, I would recommend going and seeing it. It's a fun watch. And secondly, the premise is basically what it says on the tin, right? They are K-pop stars who also hunt demons, idols, with some fantasy mixed in. More specifically, in this world, music is the magic that ties people together and drives away evil, and as a result, it is most expedient to have these hunters also become world-renowned idols, with their primary goal being the completion of this story's MacGuffin, the Golden Hongmoon, right? This magical barrier formed from the hunter's songs that would seal away the evil forever. Now, this Hongmoon is particularly notable because beyond just being the driving force of the story and our protagonist, it is also this sort of ever-present representation of her entire conflict, right? Not just the literal conflict of the completion of the Hongmoon, but also the internal conflict of who Rumi is versus who she's supposed to be. The expectations and ideals that she's brought up with her entire life, and how these things clash with all of these aspects of herself that she's buried in order to meet those expectations. At its innermost core, K-pop Demon Hunters is a story of surpassing generational trauma, of assessing these bonds and duties that tie us to those who came before, and ultimately finding acceptance for ourselves despite them. It's no coincidence that the Hongmoon, this force that both binds demons and ties the hearts of man together, presents not just as sound waves, but as threads. Because that is what the Hongmoon is. It is a thread that connects past to present, the duty of the old guard that guides the new generation. It is the expectation of an ideal, and those guardians that nurture and protect it are also those who bear the burden of perfection. They are those who must suppress their own inner demons, set aside their own desires, and take up the blade to protect those ties, binding themselves in the process. They become more an idea than an individual, always perfect, always assured, always wearing this immaculate mask to present to the world, but that mask is inherently unsustainable. Right? Rumi was essentially born into this role, and this perfect mask is something as familiar to her as her own face. And it's in the moments when the mask slips, when Rumi begins to falter, when who she is clashes with what she's supposed to be, that the Hongmoon itself begins to falter. Recognizing the hypocrisy in her own actions, she wavers. She is no longer the cool and composed center of Huntrix who exudes confidence with every beat. Instead, she is just Rumi, this flawed and confused person who has forced herself into isolation by hiding this terrible secret her entire life. She recognizes the bitter irony of her singing Golden, how deeply it contradicts this lie that she's convinced herself of. She isn't striving to be who she's meant to be, she's avoiding it. She's squashing it down in the hopes that by completing the Golden Hongmoon, she'll never have to face it. It is, at its core, avoidance. And in a cruel twist, because she denies this aspect of herself, she cannot complete Golden. She cannot complete the Hongmoon. But it isn't just Golden. While it may be the most direct and obvious reflection of Rumi's conflict, I'd argue that pretty much every song that Huntrix ever made mirrors her state of mind, right? The first song, How It's Done, is all bravado and confidence. It introduces you to this image of an idol with no real insight to their actual inner workings. It is the construction of an unshakable shield, a persona that the public is meant to adore but not intimately understand. On the other hand, Takedown is projection. It is Rumi's repressions reflected in the world around her, all of her fear and self-loathing manifested as a tangible scapegoat that she can then destroy, right? This blade to kill the evil without while turning a blind eye to the evil within. And in a sense, they're not all that different from the Saja Boys, right? These two groups are just opposing faces of a coin, a reflection of both sides of not just the idol industry, but of any commercialized creative pursuit. Yes, a true passion and love for your craft exist, and yes, that authenticity is important, but it ultimately exists at the whims of powers far beyond your control. Market force and bureaucracy, the expectations of your audience, the scrutiny of the public eye, money, desire, greed, and eventually apathy. All of these things are poisons to your pursuit, but they are necessary poisons because that's just how it works, because it is unlikely that you would be able to survive without them. Right? You go and you go and you go until eventually your passion turns cold, and this thing that you once loved becomes just another tool, a means to an end, much like Huntrix's songs. Because much like the Saja Boys' entire repertoire, these songs were crafted with intent, something we see very literally in the process of writing Takedown. It isn't creating music for the sake of creating music, but to serve some other ulterior motive, to denigrate the enemy, to fortify the Hongmoon, to capture the hearts and minds of the listeners, and, in the case of Golden, to become perfect, to shed your shame. While the song speaks of self-acceptance and moving forward, it is ultimately still just a mask. It is still a product of artifice. The chorus of the song repeats, "Gonna be golden," right? Gold, the pinnacle, the perfect color, the thing that generations upon generations of demon hunters sought, and it's the thing that Rumi seeks. Not because she desires it, but because she's always been taught that this is the only way to make her whole again, to erase this ugly side of her that she never wanted to accept. Golden is not a celebration of being true to oneself, it is a glorification of an unreachable, unattainable perfection. And it's the reason why this particular tune, despite all of the hype that it gets, isn't the final evil sealing song. Why, in the penultimate hour of their victory, everything falls apart. Because it isn't a true victory. The symptoms have been treated, a bandage has been applied, but the core root of the wound still festers underneath, and it's only when that wound is treated that Rumi can truly heal. The final act of K-pop Demon Hunters evokes this idea of the dark night of the soul. And while this concept is rooted in Catholic mysticism as a process of spiritual purification, in modern media it's used more to describe crises of faith or particularly difficult sections of one's life. There are 2 songs in the movie that are presumably not created by Hundrix as a group, and both of them, Free and What It Sounds Like, take place in this final part and are instrumental in Rumi's own Dark Night of the Soul. In a way, because they're not created with ulterior motive, they are the songs that are truest to what she wants and who she truly is as a person. Now, the preceding process to the Dark Night is the illumination, in which God's presence is felt but is not stable. In more secular terms, we can read this as a brief reprieve, as a moment of epiphany or comfort from one's suffering, something like the calm before the storm. And this parallels with Free, where if even for just the slightest moment, even if it's just the smallest possible epiphany, Rumi touches the core of her own dysfunction. She recognizes that maybe running and hiding isn't the answer, that the problem must be faced head on. Even if it's for just the tiniest amount, Rumi finds self-acceptance by confiding in Jinu, by confiding in someone that she considers a kindred spirit, someone who, just like her, has done nothing but reject his very nature for most of his life. And not just his nature as a demon, but of the choices that he has made. Right? His wish is to forget, to not be burdened with the memory of his sins. Just like Rumi's quest for the Hongmoon, his wish is one of avoidance, of burying his shame, not through perfection, but through self-imposed ignorance. They are reflections of each other, bringing to light the flaws that they had so desperately tried to deny, and it's because of this that they begin to recognize that maybe these flaws aren't as bad as they had thought, that maybe it's alright to accept these parts of themselves. And it's that small amount of acceptance that allows Rumi to finally sing Golden to completion, and also to fully enter her own Dark Night of the Soul. It is the utter annihilation of the self, the destruction of everything you believed in and thought you were, every aspect of your humanity melted together in the crucible of suffering, in the hopes that maybe one day you'll be forged anew. For all intents and purposes, Rumi succeeded. Right? She found that glimmer of hope. She was able to sway Jinu to her side. She sang Golden. The Hongmoon was moments away from being completed, and then it all fell apart. What should have been her crowning moment of victory instead resulted in her losing everything she ever cared about and everything that she had worked for. And in her grief, she goes to Celine in search of solace, only to find rejection once again. And for a moment, that seems to be her breaking point, right? She seems to have fully given in to her demon, claiming that it's better if the Hongmoon is destroyed entirely. And it is. After the darkest night comes the most radiant dawn. Just like the Hongmoon, Rumi had to be broken down in order to be reborn as something better. And What It Sounds Like is an ode to this final process. It is her recognition that hiding who she is could never truly work, that molding and defining herself by the expectations of those around her could never be sustainable. And it's upon finally accepting this that her patterns come alight one final time. Laid bare to the world, they glow, not with the malevolent magenta of the demon's shame, nor the brilliant gold of the hunter's expectations, but with their own unique iridescence. It is the same color that the Hongmoon ultimately adopts, not gold, but a myriad of hues, not one singular idea of perfection, but an entire spectrum. And in the final scene of the movie, we see a reversal. Huntrix returns to its roots. Whereas at the beginning of the movie we see them drained and yearning for a vacation, here at the end they are rejuvenated, having once again connected with that true font of passion, absent of any conceit or ulterior motive. They are idols, yes, but more than that they are artists, and even more so than that, they are themselves. But yeah, that's the video. There was a lot more I wanted to talk about, mainly my own personal opinions and likes and dislikes, plus some other various insights that didn't really fit in anywhere. But at the end of the day, I just kind of decided not to include them because that would have required that I expand the scope of this video by a fair bit. And that didn't really seem worth it, since this is kind of outside of my usual wheelhouse, and you know how much YouTube's algorithm doesn't really like that. If this does wind up doing well, I'll go ahead and make another video covering the stuff I missed, but honestly I'm not too terribly optimistic on that front. Regardless, hopefully what I did make was sufficiently entertaining, right? Now, as always, I would like to give thanks to the people that support me, so thank you today for being a patron, and thank you to Pumpa Aerostar, Chip, Bones and Apple, and Fructose Tolerant for being members on YouTube. Additionally, thank you to Chip and Nevo Suez for the 10 gifted memberships each. I really do appreciate all of it, right? And as for the rest of you, if you are new here, considering doing all of that YouTube stuff, so I know that you actually want more content like this. Otherwise, I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you thought, and I will see you on the next one, alright? Bye-bye.